Hello and welcome to a spooftacular new episode of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson, and with me today is a man whose comedic wit gives Abraham Zucker and Zucker a run for their money, Mr. Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
Hello.
While July brought a typically large amount of big summer blockbusters throughout the 90s, it also provided a large number of comedies.
This month we'll be taking a look at 4 spoof movies released in July throughout the decade. The spoof movie was a subgenre once rife with greatness, but is now nearly non-existent after an onslaught of uninspired titles flooded the market. But for a look at a more profitable era for these films, this is Saved by the 90s.
Charms Blow Pop, take 1, action. Fruit flavored candy on the outside. Bubblegum on the inside. Fabulous. That's a Blow Pop. That's a Blow Pop.
Fruit charm.
Now flavors. Cherry. Grape. Strawberry. Sour apple. Watermelon. Ta-da! From Charms. What? Cut.
Do you remember that commercial? Did that still play when you were young?
I don't know. Maybe because I'm just not. I don't have any video in front of me.
That commercial played for like forever, just for years.
I imagine years. I probably have seen it at some point, but
our first title this month was a parody of Top Gun, released 5 years prior. Directed by one of the kings of the spoof movie, Jim Abrahams, and starring Charlie Sheen, this is Hot Shots.
On the ground, they're just like other men.
I'm not R2. I'm not R2.
Not. But in the air, they're like no one else. Charlie Sheen.
Be careful out there. I'll be just fine.
Lloyd Bridges.
Had a better part of my bladder blown off the Guadalcanal.
Carrie Elways.
I came to get my chafing fish.
Valeria Golino. And Saddam Hussein as himself. Hot Shots. Rated PG-13. Starts Wednesday, July 31st at theaters everywhere.
Released on July 31st, 1991, Sheen stars as a renegade pilot recruited to join a top-secret mission for the Air Force. He then finds himself coping with an incompetent admiral and a carefully selected squadron of flyers who are either inept or half-blind. Adam, what did you think of Hot Shots?
So, as a kid, I loved both the Hot Shots movies. I was obsessed with both the Hot Shots movies. And I loved Top Gun too as a kid. And also like the Iron Eagle movies. I was really into jets and fighter jets for a time there. And the Hot Shots movies I just thought were the best. They were just laugh riots back then. And it's been many years since I've seen either one of them. And I did watch the sequel in preparation for this. And I don't know, man. Like the first one has its moments. There's some funny elements, but I don't know. I guess I just didn't like it as much as when I was like 10 when I first saw it.
Yeah, I saw this for the first time all the way through for this podcast. I think it definitely does have its moments, and just because this is like the, Abraham Zucker, like airplane style, just complete oversaturation of jokes, some things are bound to land eventually. But since they're involved with, in some capacity, I believe 3 of the 4 movies we'll be talking about this month, I feel like I'm going to say this a lot. All these movies really made me want to rewatch Airplane instead.
Yeah, I mean, I think Airplane was far, far, far superior than the 3 Abraham Zucker movies that we'll be discussing on this show. I think it just the early stuff is always better, I believe. Even their like Top Secret and Police Squad, the Naked Gun movies, like I feel like all of those work better. Actually, not so much maybe the 94 Naked Gun 33 1/3. That one didn't really work for me, but the first 2. So I think that, and this is maybe part of a larger conversation that I wanted to have around this episode, was sort of the downfall of the spoof movie and maybe what caused it to happen. And I think maybe Hot Shots is a good indicator of where it was heading, because I think that this is where it started to go downhill. Like they were still like the spoof movies were still very prevalent throughout the 90s. I mean, we saw tons of them. And I mean, these four that we're talking about today were all released in July throughout the decade, but there were many, many more. And I feel like this is where they started going downhill.
Yeah, definitely. Especially once you consider that there's almost that like one last hurrah of prominence for like when it comes to a scary movie in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
But then that like last hit of success almost represents like the ultimate end of the genre's like peak performance, because then Scary Movie inspires an entire another wave of spoof movies, all of which were not very well received critically, and after a while none of them made any money financially either.
I know that the Wayans brothers, they did like I'm Gonna Get You Sucker and Don't Be a Menace in the 90s as well. And they sort of, I guess they teamed up with Abrahams and Zucker for the Scary Movie movies. And I think that was it. Like from that point on, it was just downhill. Maybe because it was the success of Scary Movie 1 and 2 that ultimately provided the downfall. Because like you said, then you started getting this onslaught where there's like Epic Movie and all these other movies that started coming out, and they started, I believe that they were getting less and less creative and less clever with the jokes, until finally it just ended up being pop culture references, like that had no like merit on the story whatsoever.
Yeah,
and
just
it was
an acknowledgement that a particular pop culture item or individual exists.
Yeah, and you see that in like in Hot Shots, for instance. You see there's definitely pop culture references, aside from the fact that the whole thing is just a parody of Top Gun, but they're done in such a way that it's not so egregious where that's like the centerpiece of the movie. Whereas with the later ones, especially the ones that were like straight to video, were just, this is a thing that is popular right now, we're gonna put it in here and make fun of it. And it just didn't work.
Yeah, it appears that the most recent efforts of Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer were kind of known for making the bottom of the barrel spoof movies through the 2000s. Their most recent effort was 4 years ago. It was a parody of the Fast and the Furious series called Super Fast, and made $2 million on a $20 million budget.
Oof.
So,
there was just a couple weeks ago, there was a Game of Thrones parody that was released on VOD. I can't remember the name of it, but it looked
this is the first time hearing of its existence.
I thought Hot Shots was still a fun movie. You have Charlie Sheen playing the sort of Tom Cruise character. You got your Lloyd Bridges in there, where Abrahams and Zucker may be the kings of the spoof directors. I think Lloyd Bridges has to be one of the kings of the spoof actors, because he's in so many of them. Although I guess Charlie Sheen was in a lot of them too, especially later on when he started popping up in all those like scary movies and all that.
An absolute joy to see Lloyd Bridges in not one but two of the movies we'll be discussing in this episode.
Yeah. Yep. He was also in Hot Shots Part 2 as well. He played the president in Hot Shots Part 2. And I don't know which one I like better. I watched both of them back to back. And I don't know which one I prefer of the two. Maybe the first one. The second one is more of a parody of Rambo, like the Rambo movies. There's actually no flying in it whatsoever. So I thought that the flying scenes were fun, especially like the opening scene when we see the Charlie Sheen's Topper Harley's dad flying and like when they flip upside down and all of the stuff falls onto the top of the cockpit, and not all the jokes hold up over the years, but I think it's still fun to go back and watch.
Like, I just enjoy, especially like the old, like, just the most airplane-esque jokes, or like the either something like a visual gag going on in the background, or just a bit that's like stretched out through an entire scene, like the scene of the delightfully named Lieutenant Dead Meat just walking to his plane, like as a black cat crosses his way and like under a ladder, and
his wife breaks her mirror.
Yeah,
and he doesn't have his lucky gum. It's just like one thing after the other. Yeah, those are my favorite gags too. And that or just the stupid wordplay that they like to do, that we saw a lot of in Airplane.
Yeah,
but there's plenty of that here too.
Yeah, in terms of like just the wordplay, I think once we get to Mafia, a movie that otherwise has absolutely nothing going on in it, for me has maybe my favorite single exchange of dialogue of any movie we saw at all for this month's episode, but we'll talk about it when we get there.
I'm actually getting some of these movies mixed up since I watched them in such close proximity, but I think Hot Shots was the one where they kept sitting on the dog. That was like a running gag where they would sit on the little chihuahua just nonstop. I think so.
Yeah.
I liked that gag for some reason, and they just kept it going. They kept it going. I actually don't have much more to say about Hot Shots. It's a movie that I think maybe I appreciated it more. It's interesting because I liked it more watching it as a kid, but I think that there were probably a lot of jokes that I didn't have a grasp on back then. And watching it now, it's like I understand all the jokes, but I just don't find it as funny. Because, you know, you got to be in the mood for some lowbrow humor when you pop in Hot Shots from 1991.
Yeah, I'd say I land about the same there.
My taste in comedy has changed significantly since I was 10 years old and thought fart jokes were just the funniest thing ever. Although there's a bit in Hot Shots Part 2 when Lloyd Bridges is swimming underwater and they don't know how they're gonna get onto this boat because it has all these enemies, and he farts underwater and the fart goes up and knocks them all out. I still laugh at that. The love making scene in this too, with all the food.
Of course,
I think that still holds up when they pull out the pizza and rolls up the pizza and shoves it in her face, and the olive scene. All of that stuff.
I'm a huge fan of just like her torso becoming just like
a griddle.
Yeah.
He's cooking eggs and bacon. I thought that was funny too.
Yeah, I just like when they just fully commit to it, then even if it's not terribly funny on its own, you just kind of end up laughing just because of the pure level of delivery to the entire thing.
This does make me want to go back and watch Airplane. I need to watch Airplane.
Yeah, I've seen Airplane like a million times, and I will continue to rewatch it. And I mean, when you rewatch, you just keep finding more stuff in it.
So many layers. It's just the sheer number of gags in Airplane. And like comparing Airplane to Hot Shots, like there are far, far fewer gags.
Yeah,
there's still
Hot Shots seems subdued in comparison.
Yeah, there's still I mean, it's just chock full of gags. I mean, right from the opening credits, you're seeing goofy stuff, but compared to Airplane, where it's just like almost every line was some kind of riff. Yeah, it does feel subdued in a lot of ways. Cary Elwes in here also, he was like sort of the Iceman character, I guess, as Kent Gregory. We'll be coming back to Cary Elwes later as well.
In this podcast.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap this episode. Any other things to add about Hot Shots?
When you said there's a lot of overlap, I think there's also a lot of overlap in like content as well, especially when you get to the more the gags in some of these movies that parody other movies of the time. I feel like there's a few times when there is a reference to a movie we have previously discussed on this very podcast.
Oh yeah.
Our next film is also directed by a comedy legend, Mel Brooks, who spearheaded the spoof genre in the 70s with his film Blazing Saddles. Released on July 28, 1993, this is Robin Hood Men in Tights.
20th Century Fox presents
Ow! I challenge you to a duel.
the first action hero
I accept.
and the last word in comedy,
White men can't jump.
Robin Hood, Men in Tights.
And why should the people listen to you?
Unlike some other Robin Hoods, I can speak with an English accent.
A Mel Brooks film. The legend had its coming. Rated PG-13. Starts Wednesday, July 28th at theaters everywhere.
Robin Hood comes home after fighting in the Crusades to learn that the noble King Richard is in exile and the despotic King John now rules England. Robin Hood assembles a band of fellow patriots to do battle with King John and the sheriff. Ken, we'll start it with you. What did you think of Robin Hood Men in Tights?
I'm really thinking a lot about what you said earlier about is particularly with the movies we'll be discussing today, a film that's directed and written by a particular like master of the genre, and you keep comparing it to their earlier work. You can see the similarities in structure and approach, but it's just not as sharp or as unexpected or as fresh as their early movies. And I feel like the case in point here with Mel Brooks is thinking about Blazing Saddles and then watching Robin Hood Men in Tights, where you can understand this is very much a Mel Brooks movie. It feels like no other person on the planet could have made this movie, and yet you recognize that, but it never feels particularly vital or as like necessary or as even just singular as something like Blazing Saddles is.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you could pretty much say that. I mean, obviously, Blazing Saddles is his, in my opinion, his seminal work. But you could say that about any of his previous directing efforts, for the most part, especially the ones that would be in this category, like Spaceballs, for instance. Like Spaceballs is still one of my favorite comedy movies of all time. So. Comparing Robin Hood Men in Tights to one of those, I think there's no comparison. However, I still will say that of the 4 titles that we're talking about this month, this is still my favorite of the 4. And I still love this movie. I think sure, it doesn't hold a candle to any of Mel Brooks's other movies, except for maybe Dracula Dead and Loving It, which I think this is better than that. But
and that was, I believe, his most recent. It was his last movie, and this is his second to last one. So yeah, it does kind of have the trajectory of like the later period of a director's career, but it's hardly like that was the end of like Mel Brooks's like career in general, because then a few years after his film career ends, then the stage adaptation of The Producers wins like 1 billion Tony Awards. Yeah, we want to stress this we like Mel Brooks on this podcast. We just
absolutely
aren't so hot on or in differing degrees of feeling towards this particular film.
Yeah, I think that it's still tremendously fun. Now this is a movie that I saw in the theater, and I became obsessed with it. I owned it on VHS. In fact, I still own it on VHS to this day, and I watched it endlessly as a kid. I was really into spoof movies back when I was younger. Like I loved this genre of comedy. I thought it was so great. Like Top Secret was one of my favorites, and Johnny Dangerously. I've seen them all a million times. But Robin Hood Men in Tights, I think that there's still a lot of gags that still hold up, and they still work to this day. I mean, obviously, this is a parody of Prince of Thieves, and it's got a lot of funny people in it, and it's got a lot of really, really great,
Definitely.
really great gags. You got Dave Chappelle in there as Chu, Richard Lewis as Prince John, and then Roger Reese as the Sheriff of Rottingham. Great cast.
Definitely, yeah.
And of course, Cary Elwes as Robin Hood.
Mm-hmm.
Where did as far as like spoof movies go, is this a movie that you've seen before? Is this a first time watch for you?
I think this is a first time watch. So I didn't really have any pre-existing connection to it going in. So I thought it was fine. I feel like one of the problems that a lot of these movies kind of run into eventually is that if they're trying to, like, especially for this movie, because it's, you know, it's a Robin Hood movie where a lot of the comedies based on extremely contemporary cultural references, then those references tend not to work as much in the ensuing decades. Like, one thing I do notice is that to whatever degree you can trust the production dates listed on the IMDb, a lot of these movies released in July were shooting in the February or March of April of their years of release, so it was like a really fast production speed.
Yeah.
Which increases the likelihood that there will be like kind of zeitgeisty jokes in it that either work or don't work as time goes on.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a few of those in this movie too. I can't remember. There was the Reebok pump scene where Achu's got pumps on. There was, of course, like the introductory and the outro, like minstrels are rapping. So that was a little bit of a contemporary.
That was another
injection in there.
Yeah, that was also one of the jokes I was thinking of when I said that.
I think there was some other ones in there too, some visual gags that I can't quite remember, but I feel like there were more like contemporary references in there as well. You see a lot more of them with the Abraham Zucker movies. Well, yeah, we'll definitely get into that. There's some of these movies are just chock full of them. And I feel like that's something that happened more of as with the later spoof movies. As time went on, they just started injecting more of the pop culture stuff in there.
Yeah, it feels like you can then start to see some of the components of these that in the coming years would just turn into crutches.
But I think the story is still really fun in Robin Hood Men in Tights. You have that, of course, you have like a song and dance number in there, a couple actually. And there was just a lot of really fun moments in this. The archery contest, and you know, some of the jokes I think maybe wouldn't track so well in 2019. But I think you could say that about all of these movies. There's at least a few jokes in there where you're just like, oof, that would not work. That would not fly today. But overall, I still think that it's a really fun movie.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth seeing at least once, just perhaps in the context of Mel Brooks in general, such like a important figure in like American comedy for the past several decades. I still do think it's instructive to like watch his career at different stages. And it would hardly be like, even if it was in more of a scholarly context of watching it, it would hardly be a chore, because it is pretty routinely entertaining and funny, even if it feels like not everything is landing. And from my perspective, just watching it for the first time now.
You have Tracy Ullman in there as Latrine.
Oh yeah, she's good in this.
The witch. She's so funny. She's obsessed with the Sheriff of Rottingham, and she just wants to get him so bad. And you get little cameos in there, like Dom DeLuise is in there as sort of this, you know, Godfather type character. Don Giovanni is his name, and I don't know how many times Dom DeLuise had to have parodied The Godfather over the years.
And for more discussion about comedic references to The Godfather, I feel like we say this a lot. We can discuss that more later in the episode.
Yeah. Our next movie is
Mhm.
it's coming up.
Mhm.
Dick Van Patten in there too, and a quick little cameo. I don't know. It's fun. I think it doesn't really stand up to most of Mel Brooks' other movies, but it's still worth a look, I think. I like the bridge fight when he first meets Little John, and their
Oh yeah.
little bow staffs kept breaking in half, and then Little John falls in the creek and he can't
I'm a
swim.
big fan of like the bridge fight.
Yeah, I think the bridge fight is really great.
Look, I say we just go over there. No, let's just play it cool. Will you come on? They're looking at us. Really? Yeah. Okay, let's go over there. But I get the one with the Michelob Light. How come I always get the ugly one? There's ordinary beer. Then there's the smooth, refreshing taste of Michelob Light. Beer or Michelob? Are you two sisters?
I find that commercial to be so offensive.
Yes, it is. Like every single turn in that commercial felt more unexpected in unpleasant ways than the last one.
Yeah, when I was going through July commercials, and I stumbled upon that one, I was just like, oh, I gotta use this one. This is too rich, and it doesn't even make any sense at all.
Yeah.
It's just, oh my god.
Yeah, it's just like a handful of like hard right turns that get increasingly worse.
Drink a Michelob Light if you're not ugly. Oh my god.
Yeah, truly I don't know, I guess that was like a 30-second ad.
Yeah.
Yeah, truly the 30-second ad that felt like it was about 4 minutes long. I was just sitting here like, is this over? Is this almost over? Because it keeps getting worse.
This is like the type of ad you'd see. It'd be like the My Pillow ad, and then this, and that would be playing during Hannity.
Yeah. It probably still plays during Hannity.
Probably that's all they can afford is the old Michelob Light ad from 1997. Our next feature is another one directed by Jim Abrahams, this time a spoof of The Godfather featuring Lloyd Bridges in his fourth collaboration with Abrahams. Released on July 24th, 1998, this is Jane Austen's Mafia.
Look, a falling star.
This summer,
Make a wish.
one movie will make your dreams come true. Mafia.
So long, Mommy.
It'll move you, shock you, and scare the rap out of you. Touchstone Pictures presents Mafia, the one summer movie where size
Say hello to my little friend.
doesn't matter. Rated PG-13. Starts this Friday.
Mafia is a takeoff on The Godfather, involving the son of a mafia king taking over for his dying father. Adam, what did you think of Mafia?
It's bad.
Jane Austen's Mafia.
Yeah, it's bad.
It is bad.
I remember this is one that I saw in the theater with a bunch of my friends, and even then we were just like, no, this is really bad. I mean, I think that this is when things were going downhill with the spoof movie pretty steadily by this point. I mean, once Mafia came out, you're just like, oh boy, this is it was spiraling by this point, because this movie is chock full of very, very pop culture, like zeitgeisty type references, like El Nino. The one when he mentions El Nino, that was like a huge thing back then. That was the first time the term El Nino was used, and everybody was
kind
talking
of like
about
that
it.
joke.
Everybody was talking about it. In that same scene when he mentions El Nino, there was a Menendez brothers joke.
Oh yeah.
he finds the weapon that the Menendez brothers used hidden away in the bathroom right before the pipe broke and he got wet and said blamed it on El Nino. Hilarious. Yeah, this. So I really hated it back then when I saw it in the theater. Watching it now, I think I didn't hate it quite as much just because um, I was so far removed from that time period that you can go back and watch it now and you're just like, you kind of laugh at how stupid the references were and stuff.
Yeah, to the point where I feel like I was missing a bunch of stuff because there were just a lot of very zeitgeisty throwaway references that only worked in 1998.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, there's probably a bunch of stuff that I missed too.
Mm-hmm.
There was there was that one joke where it's also sort of a riff on Casino as much as it is a riff on
As
The
evident
Godfather.
in the very start of the film, which is basically a parody of the first scene and opening credits of Casino.
And it also it's a riff on Goodfellas too. There's some Goodfellas references in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And during that scene, when they show like them shoveling all the money and stuff, and they're using like trucks and they're dumping all the money in these trucks, and the one truck is labeled like Democratic National Committee or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally didn't understand that reference, if there was some sort of what the joke was behind that.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was something going on then when, I don't know, people were accusing the DNC of like having a lot of money. I don't know. I don't know.
There was some vague thing. Like, I remember once reading about like some like scandal peripheral to like the fundraising efforts for Clinton's re-election in 96. I don't know if that is in any way relevant. That might be it. Like, there was something about like the DNC's fundraising ahead of the 96 election is the best I can figure.
Yeah, I don't know. This movie made money. It had a $10 million budget and it ended up grossing almost double that. So it at least made, it made its budget back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if maybe one of the reasons that we don't see a lot of spoof movies is because they were sort of that mid-tier budget-wise.
Mm-hmm.
The spoof movies were never like super cheap, but they also obviously weren't like huge $100 million pictures either. And I'm wondering if maybe the decline of the mid-tier movie contributed to fewer of these spoof movies getting made.
Yeah, I think that definitely might be another contributing factor here. Maybe another thing about it is that even a movie that takes a comparatively short time to make for a movie takes a long time to make compared to just how information and references travel now. So the idea of the spoof movie as a vessel for just contemporary pop culture references feels just too slow now.
I feel like that there's a space for it though. I feel like you can make a spoof movie in today's climate and just revert back to the the older days of the spoof movie, the 80s or even like the 70s, late 70s and into the 80s, like that style of spoof movie. And you can have pop culture references in there, but maybe just, pull back on them a little bit and not just be like one of the Seltzer. Was it Friedberg?
Friedberg and Seltzer.
Yeah, one of the Friedberg and Seltzer movies, and just like have it wall to wall references that pertain to nothing in the movie itself.
I did say that one of my favorite jokes of any movie favorite single jokes of any movie we've discussed this month is in this movie. It is not one of the pop culture references, which I feel is indicative. It's just that throwaway line after Lloyd Bridges' character is shot like a ridiculous number of times, and then while he is recovering, someone says to him, "You lost a lot of blood, but we found most of it." I just really like that.
Yeah, that was Jay Moore's character as
I thought it was
Tony.
Yeah.
When he went in. Yeah, Billy Burke in there, Christina Applegate, Lloyd Bridges was funny as ever in this. The I'm probably one of my favorite scenes is his death scene when he's chasing the kid around with the watermelon in his mouth, and the kid's name's Chucky, which is like an obvious reference to Child's Play. And the kid ends up killing him by spraying him with like bug spray. That was probably one of my favorite scenes. There was there's a scene that made me laugh. It was just a one-liner type thing where I don't even remember. It was Jay Moore's character, and he was talking to, I think, the woman who plays Pepper. I'm not sure about that, Pamela Gidley, but it was the sort of the Basic Instinct riff that they did. I think that was in Mafia. I know the line was when he's walking with her and she says, I wanted to be a research chemist, but my legs were too long. I don't know why. I just thought that line was so funny. This movie has its moments. It's certainly on the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to these kind of parody movies, but it's certainly worth a few laughs, I think.
Definitely. Like all of these movies contain at some level like the templates, like this template of like the greatest movies either of the genre are made by these filmmakers. So there's definitely always something there. Like none of these are without merit.
Mafia's, there's probably at least half a dozen of these movies that I prefer over Mafia.
I can't imagine there's going to be a large scale Mafia revival anytime soon, but
yeah, like most of the Leslie Nielsen vehicles, I would probably prefer over Mafia, except maybe like the later ones that he was in. Probably everything after Wrongfully Accused, I was not really.
I believe he was in a few of the Scary Movie sequels towards the end of his career as well.
Oh, he was. He was in Scary Movie 4. Oh, he was in Superhero Movie. I feel like we just need to mention Leslie Nielsen just because we're talking about spoof movies.
We can't have an episode about spoof movies without at least invoking him at one point.
Unfortunately, he wasn't in any of the movies that we're discussing on this episode, but Leslie Nielsen, what a class act. I don't know if you've ever seen Leslie Nielsen's Bad Golf Made Easier. It was like a VHS.
I don't think I have.
It was a VHS. So like back when, VHS was huge, there would be like all of these sports videos that would come out, like sports bloopers and like all these like how to play golf and stuff like that. And Leslie Nielsen came out with a bunch of these like golf tutorial videos, and they were just so funny. I don't know. I don't think I've seen all of them, but I definitely saw Leslie Nielsen's Bad Golf Made Easier. And I just, man, I love it. Yeah, he made a bunch. He made Bad Golf My Way. And there was at least another one. Yeah, Leslie Nielsen's Stupid Little Golf Video. Oh, man. Oh, Repossessed. I forgot about that movie too. That's a great one. I think if there's an ongoing theme in this episode, it's just that these movies are making me want to watch better spoof movies.
Yeah.
Like that's what continues to happen.
Like I said, I felt like that was the one safe prediction we can make at the start of this episode, is that it would probably be somewhat valuable to just listen back after this goes to this post and just make a running tally of how many times we talk about wanting to rewatch Airplane.
I'm trying to think of if there was anything else about Mafia that I enjoyed, but not really.
Also, the completely unexpected like joke at the end, just about like destroying Barney the dinosaur.
Oh yeah, that was a thing. Barney was a thing.
Well, yeah, Barney's a thing, but I feel like the entire existence of Barney has been paralleled by an entire cottage industry of opposition to Barney.
I remember there was like a Doom mod that you could play where it turned all the monsters into Barney, and he would just kill Barney. Many versions of Barney. Yeah, if you're into mafia movies, then maybe you'll find a lot of the jokes in this funny, because they certainly do spoof a lot of the mafia movies that were released up until this point. I think that Jay Moore maybe wasn't the strongest lead in this for this movie, but I mean, he did fine, I guess.
He does fine.
Yeah. I think Billy Burke was pretty funny as the brother, Joey.
Yeah, I feel like this episode is going to come in a tad short just because these are all movies that our opinions just average out to it's sort of fine on. And so then
it's hard to really dig into these movies too, because it's more or less just a compilation of like sight gags. So it's hard to really deconstruct these movies.
It's hard to just verbally describe this particular kind of comedy. I think a lot of comedy movies are just hard to describe verbally in this context, but especially a spoof movie that's just so oversaturated in small visual gags. Yeah, you can like talk a lot about, say, a drama movie that is very bad, because then if it's particularly over earnest, then it becomes entertaining in a completely different way. But like a comedy that isn't terribly funny, there's only really so much you can say after a point. Our final film this month is directed by David Zucker, the other third of the Abraham Zucker and Zucker trio. It stars Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the creators of the smash hit series South Park, which at this point was in the middle of its second season. Released on July 31st, 1998, this is BASEketball.
This summer, the director of The Naked Gun takes aim.
Heads up, big guy.
At professional sports.
Go out there and make that shot, right?
BASEketball.
No, Daddy, don't touch me there.
Rated R. Now playing.
Two losers from Milwaukee, Coop and Reamer, invent a new game playing basketball using baseball rules. When the game becomes a huge success, they, along with a billionaire's help, form the Professional BASEketball League, where everyone gets the same pay and no team can change cities. Theirs is the only team standing in the way of major rule changes that the owner of a rival team wants to institute. Ken, what say you about BASEketball?
When I was watching it, I messaged you, and I think I said something along, this is an extremely 1998 movie. This movie would not have been made 2 years earlier. It would not have been made 2 years later. It could only have been made in a time frame that would have gotten it out either in 1998 or within a couple months of it in either direction.
Yeah, this is the most 1998 movie that has ever or will ever exist in history. I would love somebody to make a new movie that takes place in 1998 and try to somehow make it more 1998 than BASEketball. Because
this is such a 1998 movie that it feels like it's almost like it feels like it has so much late 90s in it. It feels like, I don't know, like a high school spirit day where someone chose the decade of like the late 90s specifically, and that would somehow feel less oversaturated with 1998 than this movie does.
Yeah, it's like at the end of the school year when kids are making collages of their year, and this is everything that's in that collage. You have, of course, copious amount of ska music in this one. Like Real Big Fish was in the movie. They were constantly playing. You got a over the top ska soundtrack, ska everywhere. You got rollerblades all over the place. You got Jerry Springer references. You got obviously South Park references in there. It's just Jenny McCarthy. I mean the people that are in it, Kato Kaelin. It's everything about it is so steeped in 1998. It is it's incredible how of the very specific, I mean, this isn't just like very 90s, it's very late 90s.
Late 90s. it is like I feel like it is the kind of late 90s that among things we've discussed on this podcast, the only thing that comes relatively close would be like that first scene where they pull up to the high school in The Rage Carry 2.
Oh yeah,
And they're just panning past like all the students walking into school.
Wearing like the big giant t-shirts and flannel shirts and the giant jeans and playing hacky sack and skating, and the ska music's playing there too. Yeah. That was a really great opening scene, but man, BASEketball is like just the whole
it's a
way
whole
through.
movie of this.
The whole way through is just straight 98. It's incredible. It really is. I mean, the movie itself is not incredible.
Yeah, no. It has a very particular retroactive value now, and it has very little to do with the actual jokes.
Comparing it, we said before, there's always an outlier in every episode. There's like at least one outlier that feels not quite the same as the rest in a theme, and I feel like this is that one. It is very much a spoof movie, and you could easily like quantify it as a spoof movie, but this has a much heavier reliance on story, and there's not quite as many like just random sight gags and like non sequiturs and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean there's still a lot, but
to me this felt more like a fleshed out comedy than Mafia.
Yeah, it is very much in this. It is very much does have a more full story than a movie like Mafia, but even like the existence of the plot itself feels like part of the spoof, because it is such a knowingly generic retelling of essentially like every sports movie or just every movie about like two like regular people suddenly becoming famous and successful.
Yeah, it's funny that we watched this movie after we did the Be Kind Rewind podcast. We watched a bunch of kids sports movies for that, and how all of those plots felt so similar. And this is very much the same way, where you have this like scrappy team and with this new sport, and then like they get really big and they lose sight of what made it special to begin with, and blah blah blah. But you have the added like kind of love story element to this too, which maybe that's why it feels a little bit different to me than some of the other spoof movies, where there's this like almost like sentimental layer that they tried to incorporate in with the love story that doesn't work. But the other
it does represent something of a different effort or approach than the other ones.
And that's not to say that the other ones, like Hot Shots obviously has a love story in it too, but the way that they handle that is like in a completely unserious manner, whereas I think that this one tries to do this love story in a more earnest way that again does not really work, but they attempted it at least. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of this movie.
No, there's not a terrible amount to latch onto here. Just once you get away from the unintended, or maybe intended, like somewhat intended value of how extremely of its time it is. But once you get to the actual content and the things that it's deliberately trying to make you laugh with, and it's a lot more sporadic.
Yeah, I think that again, there's a lot of jokes in here that just wouldn't track in 2019. I think a lot of jokes that a lot of people would probably found offensive even back then too.
Yeah, I was saying that like this would have been the a bit on the boundary, and even in 98.
I think so. I mean, it is involving the South Park guys. So
I mean, yeah. So
which is interesting.
Would have to anticipate it going in, I suppose.
Yeah, which is interesting that they don't have like writing credits with this at all. Although the jokes feel very South Parkian.
I'd imagine there was a lot of, I don't know, improv work on it, maybe, or just. And
I mean, you even had that
on set rewriting.
Yeah, you even had that that song from Trey Parker in there too, and which also felt very reminiscent of South Park when he's in the car listening to the song and it's like describing exactly what he's going through, which I thought was actually a really funny scene.
That is a really good joke.
Like how he's grooving with it and he's relating to it, and then it starts to get really, really specific, and he just has this like befuddled look on his face.
Yeah.
It's definitely a movie that's not without its moments. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, I really liked that.
I think a lot of the sort of broad, like lowbrow gags, just those were the ones that I think didn't really land for me. But there were a lot of other little one-liners and things that I thought were still pretty funny.
Absolutely. I'm gonna think a lot about that like scene in the car with the song.
I'd like to have a count of how many times they say dude in this movie, because
I think I remember seeing I think I do remember seeing something about that where someone did try to count the number of times that they say dude in this movie.
It's a lot. They say dude a lot. I mean, they make a joke out of it at one point.
Yeah,
but
like there's a scene where that's like the only thing they're saying to each other.
Oh, I just noticed that. So according to the IMDb trivia here, that this is the film that coined the phrase "derp," which has turned into a meme.
Yeah. And this is where I found the dude count. This is
98 times.
21 of them during the scene where they're just arguing back and forth, and that's like the only thing they're saying. It's like the bookend of every sentence.
98 dudes.
That's great. 21 in one scene, as said by the completely verifiable IMDb trivia section.
Right. I mean, I'm not going to go back and
I'm not. Yeah,
count, so I'll definitely.
I will assume it feels true.
Yeah,
I could believe that there's about an average of one dude a minute, not evenly distributed, but you know.
Yeah, I could see that. They say it a whole lot, which I guess is fine. I don't know. It didn't really bother me too much.
Yeah, I didn't really notice it until then. They make it the joke of that scene, and then I realized how obsessively it was said throughout.
I mean, the game. Every time I see BASEketball, I've seen this probably 3 or 4 times, and every time I see it, I try my hardest to understand the rules and how they play the game. And I don't think I still am able to quite grasp how it works, but you know, the one element that's maybe a highlight is the psych out thing, and that's used a whole lot in this. Like a lot of the jokes are the psych outs, where you essentially are trying to cause your opponent to choke and miss the shot. And I'll see the problem I had was that I didn't think any of the psych outs were particularly funny. So you have like, I think on the trivia page it said there's like 24 of them in the movie. And it's just like, okay, well that's like 24 times that I didn't laugh.
Yeah, that's essentially the only rule or aspect of BASEketball I could delineate from the entire movie. I'm assuming that there was no effort to actually create a game that you could follow.
I don't think so. I mean, they sort of, when they're first making up the rules at the beginning of the movie, you can kind of get some broad,
but it doesn't really track over to what you actually end up seeing.
Right. Yeah. Especially with how like the rebounds work and stuff like that. I have no idea how those really work, but I don't think it really matters.
So you do have to love any sport, whether real or fictional, where an important part of the game is like a backdrop of a garage.
Yeah.
Like it is vital in the universe of this movie that BASEketball be played on what deliberately looks like a suburban soundstage. And I like that.
I like it too. I think that adds a little bit of a charm to it. You know, one of the big things that I mentioned in the synopsis is like this takes place in a world where like they're looking at actually like real problems in major league sports and like compounding them to an insane degree, and that's how a sport like basketball can actually exist.
Mhm.
And it's like they at the beginning of the movie they talk about how like they tried to do inner sports where it was like they blended football and baseball and stuff, and I thought that was it's a funny idea. It sort of reminded me of Idiocracy for some reason, where it takes place in this future
Yeah.
where like
Where,
corporations have completely taken over professional sports to the point where like nobody watches them anymore, and they're sort of in the decline.
Entirely just marketing exercises.
Yeah, where like all of one of the kind of unfunny sight gags at the beginning was like they were all somebody scored a touchdown. They were all like doing sort of this river dance thing at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
River dance. Was that Hot Shots? There was a movie.
Yeah, there was. I think that was Mafia.
Was it Mafia?
Yeah.
Where there was a Michael Flatley gag about river dance, and I was just like, oh my god.
I mean, it does make sense that they would cross over on each other since they were released a week apart.
The river dance, man. River dance was huge during that time. Oh my god. Everybody talking about Michael Flatley and his river dance. It was just all over TV, and for like, I don't know, maybe it was like a summer or something. It was just everywhere.
One thing that haunts me a lot is going back and every year at the week before the Oscars at Vanity Fair, Richard Lawson does like this exhaustive column where he will go through the Oscar ceremony of like 20 years prior. And one thing the Oscars had in the 90s was they would have like these dance numbers set to like, it was like a medley of like music from all the Best Picture nominees with where there was a dance choreographed for them. And I want to believe like at least more than 1 year in the late 90s, it was like a Michael Flatley thing.
I'm sure.
I mean, it's incredible to me that was a thing where there were multiple years in a row at the Oscars where the Best Picture nominees were set to dance. And I simultaneously resent that ever happened. And I also absolutely demand that they bring that back.
Oh man,
I want the dance for I don't know. I can't no, can anyone even remember what happened to the Oscars? Whatever was nominated last year. What does the dance for The Favorite look like?
That would actually probably be a decent dance, since there is actually a good dance number in that movie.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, bad example because that would actually make sense. The Phantom Thread dance.
There it is.
An amazing movie that has very little dancing in it.
I'd like to see that. Yeah, getting back to basketball, just these are the guys that did Book of Mormon. It's incredible to me.
Yeah, they like I mentioned to you, they are 3/4 of the way to an EGOT. They don't have the Oscar. I want to believe that like there was a pretty good chance, I think, if I remember like going back and reading about these previous Oscar ceremonies correctly, it was thought that the year they were nominated for the song from the South Park movie that they might have won, but they didn't. But they had a chance. If they did, they would have had the full EGOT. They would have had, because they have the Emmys from South Park, they have a Grammy and a Tony from Book of Mormon. If they gotten the Oscar for Blame Canada from the South Park movie, they would have had all four. They would have been, I believe, one of like the less than 20 people in history to have won all four.
Yeah, I mean they're a talented group of guys.
Yeah.
Book of Mormon was one of the very few musicals that I've actually seen on Broadway, and it deserves all the Tonys that it has received. Although I don't really understand how the Tonys work, to be honest with you.
I don't either, and I am still find myself completely fascinated by them just because it is a thing that in our like the in the way that like the media network program currently works, it doesn't make any sense for it to still be a national broadcast, but like a nationally broadcasted program. But I'm so happy that it is, because it is the one opportunity for like this one, like essentially like city specific industry to have like a moment where it can advertise to the rest of the country for a yield of revenue that I imagine doesn't exist. Like, so what if people all over the country can watch the Tony Awards? That probably doesn't mean that you're going to get people that otherwise weren't going to shows to start going to shows, but I love that it's there.
I just don't understand how the nominations work, and I'm sure that
I think I actually do something. I do know something about how the nominations work. I do remember reading something about it. So basically, there is a nominating committee that has to see everything that opens on Broadway in a given year, but it is the nominating committee. And what is weird is that sometimes now, the Tony equivalent of Oscar season is that a lot of the big shows open in like this late spring, like right when the nomination period, like in the spring, right when the nomination period closes. But sometimes they will nominate something from a play that had like, or something that had a limited run in the fall. So by the time the nominations are announced, the show is closed. So it's a nominated show that the rest of the voting body cannot see. So you're not supposed to vote in a category, I assume, where you haven't seen all the nominees. I assume everyone still does. But that does occasionally happen, I believe, where there'll be a show nominated for a Tony, but by the time it gets nominated, the rest of the voting body can't see it because it is closed like 3 months ago.
Oh, how does it work with like Book of Mormon, which won many Tonys? I'm assuming. I know won several, but
yes,
how does it work when you have a show that gets nominated multiple years in a row? Like, does it have to be like a cast change or what?
No, I believe you're only eligible the year that you open, basically.
Okay, so Book of Mormon can't get nominated for like, I don't know, best musical or whatever it is.
No,
like
it
3 years
it got
in.
one. If the production closes and then like some years down the line there's a revival of it on Broadway, then that would be eligible as a revival, and it would be eligible in the categories again because it's a new production. But
because you always see like maybe you don't, but like here we see ads on TV for shows all the time, and it'll be like winner of 26 Tonys, and it's just like whoa. So I'm guessing that they are able to like include those that go off Broadway and then come back.
I guess like that for a show that like had a revival, I would assume so, because I know when you're opening, you're only eligible that first year. So I guess if it closes and then at some point in the future they open again, I guess they can make it like a cumulative thing. Like a show that's had multiple revivals then could say that there's somehow, yeah, I guess that seems vaguely misleading, but I guess that's allowed. I mean, I know like the awards bodies are very specific about how you can advertise a work that has won one of the whatever major show business award it's eligible for. I know they have very tight rules on how you can advertise that, but I guess that's somehow permitted.
I just like, it's one of those things that I just never cared to look into ever. I've never watched the Tonys. I don't know. It's not my.
I do from time to time. Yeah, and I also like just the idea. Like, of course, award shows are completely ridiculous. Awards are kind of ridiculous, of course, but I do like the amount of like rule structuring that goes into like the creation of these awards. Like the rules for them are just always so completely rigid and ridiculous. Like the Emmys probably have the most fantastic set of rules just because there are so many Emmy categories. So they have to radically change every year how you can win an Emmy and how the process of nominating someone for an Emmy is. One fun thing about the EGOT though is that I believe on the Wikipedia for EGOT, they have a list of people who have 3 out of the 4, and it sorts them by what they're missing. If they're missing an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, or a Tony. My favorite thing is like there's something, yeah, like 31 people have all of them except the Oscar, 26 have everything except a Grammy, 23 have everything except a Tony, only 10 have everything except an Emmy because there are like so many Emmy categories.
Oh yeah.
Like there's like hundreds of Emmy categories, and like this podcast might have an Emmy. And they just never told us.
Would it be prime time or daytime? I'm wondering.
I don't know.
I would hope prime time. Just
Yeah.
want to stay away from that daytime Emmy. That's
Is
like
are the daytime Emmys even on TV anymore?
I don't know if they're on TV. I know they exist, but I don't know if they're on TV. I can't imagine that they're a big ratings winner.
I know there are people, at least a couple of people, I can't remember who exactly it is, but I know there are people who, like, I think one example was there was a musical where, like, you could do a musical if you win a Tony for it, and then if you're on the cast recording and that cast recording wins a Grammy, and then they recently introduced a daytime Emmy for outstanding like performance on a talk show or variety show. So if you're like on like, you know, Good Morning America, the Today Show will sometimes have performances for musicals. So if you're on that and then you win, and then that wins that daytime Emmy, then you also win an Emmy. So you could win like 3 out of the 4 for one project in the span of a year.
Nice.
I mean, that's pretty great.
I wonder if that's ever happened.
I'm thinking of someone specific. I do remember reading that. Yes, it was Rachel Bay Jones, who is a very great, like, prolific actress in all sorts of mediums. Yeah, I do remember reading this, just going through like my random like Wikipedia rabbit holes of like weird awards trivia research. She was part of the original like Broadway company of Dear Evan Hansen. She won a Tony for it. Then she won a Grammy the next year because the cast recording won the Grammy for Best Musical Theater Album. And then that year she won a Daytime Emmy for a performance that the cast did on the Today Show. So she won 3 out of the 4 in 1 year for one thing, which is pretty amazing. I mean, if you, like, that's great.
Yeah, more power to you.
Yeah, that's like, I'm not saying that with any irony at all. That's amazing. I feel like this says a lot about BASEketball, that this is what we've been talking about for the last 20 minutes.
Yeah, not a lot to say. Not a lot more to say about BASEketball. It's just Trey Parker and Matt Stone doing their thing in a movie that somehow they didn't write or direct.
Mm-hmm.
That, going back and watching it now, like, even going into it, I was like, well, they wrote it, right? Like, I knew that Zucker directed it, but I was like, certainly they have a writing credit. But no, they don't. Very odd.
I mean, it definitely feels like they had a lot to do with what we end up seeing in the film. So
yeah, I mean, I guess it's like they don't have, like, I don't know if they have any kind of writing credits on like the South Park games, the 2 recent games that came out over the last couple of years. But I mean, they certainly had a ton of creative input on those games, and I'd like to see them do a new movie or something. At some point. I mean, I know that I'm sure that South Park keeps them very busy, but I'd like to see them branch out again and do something else. Because I mean, Book of Mormon's great, and their movies have been. I wasn't into Orgasmo, but like Cannibal the Musical, and I think that's their first feature. It's not bad for a trauma movie, at least. All right, I think that's gonna wrap it up for this month. Thank you so much for listening. If you have a moment, please consider reviewing us on iTunes. We appreciate that very much. If there's a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, shoot us an email at 90s@filmpulse.net or send us a DM on Twitter or Facebook at 90spod. For Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson, and this has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.